Hello and good morning. So we're on our way to Harley Davidson Dublin to test ride the new Pan America. As part of this first impressions video, there are a few questions I want to consider. Number 1, could I realistically consider owning this bike? Number 2, how would it fare under typical touring conditions here in Ireland? And number 3, how does it compare to other adventure bikes? So, first impressions, it's a substantial piece of equipment. So first observation, the clutch is really light, which is great. Like the clutch on my bike is really heavy, really sticky. Biting point, slightly different position, so just adapting to the controls. So first challenge, tight roundabout. How does it handle? Fine. Dips in nicely, not too heavy, and very stable. Observation number 2, riding position. Very upright, the bars quite far forwards, a little bit further forwards compared to my bike, but very comfortable. Quite a narrow bike for the size. Wind protection, you know, it's pretty good, as you would expect. What the hell are you doing? So, can it filter? Yeah, it's not a particularly wide bike. Get used to this biting point. So in terms of braking, the brakes are pretty sharp, and you don't get the impression that this is a 250 kilogram bike. So in terms of handling, the turning is pretty quick, and it feels really stable, which you would expect from such a long wheelbase. So just noticing my gear selection, I'm trying to get a feel for where the bike is happy to ride at. So currently I'm at 3,000 revs at the moment, and yeah, it feels fairly happy at around this range. So one topic that has to be discussed is the looks. So I know probably a majority of people are going to say that this is an ugly looking bike, especially around the frontal area. But for me, I'm not sure. I'm still forming my opinion on in terms of looks. It's got a certain neo-industrial sort of sturdiness to the styling, which I think is good. But is this a beautiful bike? No. Is it a decent looking bike? The jury's still out on that, I think. But I would say I don't particularly think bikes in this category are particularly pleasing on the eye. So let's see, overtaking power. Ooh, got the lights, slow down. So in terms of raw acceleration, it didn't quite have the punch that I was expecting from an engine of this size. See how it does on this corner. Yeah, handling very nice, very stable for me. Very easy bike to ride in that regard. Because of the quick tipping on this bike, you don't really feel the weight.
So now I'm going to switch to an overdub because, as it turns out, trying my hand at wannabe motorcycle journalist is more difficult than I thought. I've had a little bit more time to think about this, so hopefully there's a few observations that I can bring to the table before I make some conclusions. So on the engine, low down it's very smooth and feels very refined for a big twin, and not at all agricultural, which was sort of what I was expecting. In terms of the engine sound and exhaust note, it's okay, it wasn't what I was expecting. The particular bike I rode did have the aftermarket exhaust, but it didn't have the same growl and bark as my Ducati Timagoni combination. On the engine performance, I'll reserve judgment since I wasn't in the mode with the full power. There was probably only one or two places on the route where I could have stretched its legs, so it was no biggie really. If I was to seriously consider owning this bike, this was something I would have to come back to, as I would want to have more overtaking power than my current ride. So since having done the test ride, the styling has slightly grown on me, and now I would say it's a pretty decent looking bike, particularly in the metallic grey or black colours. However, I think something needs to be done to improve the look of the bike from the front. I'm referring to the black plasticky bits in between the screen and the fairing. So in terms of handling, my overall impression is that it's an easy bike to ride. At low speeds, it's predictable, and at higher speeds, it's very planted and stable, which is probably a direct result of a combination of its wheelbase and its weight. Looking at it from the side, I did think this is a very long bike, with an almost cruiser-like wheelbase. But apparently on paper, the wheelbase is the same as the Africa Twin. In the beginning, I mentioned 3 questions that I want to consider as part of my conclusion, and I will now answer these in reverse order. Question 3. How does it compare to other adventure bikes? So being the first time I've ridden a bike of this type, weight and engine capacity, that's something I can't really answer. So on this point, all I can do is defer to a wider consensus that it's a solid addition to the venture bike market and a very good first attempt by the manufacturer. Another thing that needs to be taken into consideration is the price point versus the competition. I don't have a full set of facts in front of me, but I believe the Pan America will be priced less than the Ducati Multistrada and around the same level as the KTM Super Adventure. There are various factors which muddy the water, making like-for-like comparisons difficult, such as the various optional extras and the price differences between countries. But this is really a bit beyond the scope of what I'm trying to do here. Question number 2. How would it fare under typical touring conditions here in Ireland? I think it would do pretty well. So the thing to consider about Ireland is that starting from Dublin, you can only pretty much ride for 4 hours in each direction, and of that, only half would be motorway type roads. Given this situation, this made me think if some of the advantages of this type of bike can be fully realised versus something which just loves to be thrown about on the back roads. And finally, number 1, could I realistically consider owning this bike? And to that I would answer that if I'm in the market for an adventure bike, then the Pan America would be an option that I would have to seriously consider. Thinking about this further made me question if a big adventure bike is too much of a compromise. And what I mean by this is the sacrifice of off-road and sport riding performance in favour of touring ability. It could be the case for my own situation that a 2-bike solution could better meet my requirements and preferences. And this concludes my analysis. Big thanks to Dublin Harley Davidson for the test ride. If you're around Junction 10 on the M50, go check them out, and I'll see you in the next one.